Welcome to Gut Punch, the podcast that explores life-changing moments. Hosted by Kathryn Lancioni, a seasoned educator with personal insights into resilience. Kathryn shares how life can change in an instant, shaping our path forward. Each episode features inspiring guests who face their own gut punch moments. Guests share their journeys through loss, upheaval, and triumph. What to expect: honest conversations, lessons in resilience, inspiration for growth. Join Kathryn as she highlights courage and perseverance in every story. Gut Punch is a reminder that there is always a path forward. Be part of the conversation. Register now to join Kathryn for today's journey.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Gut Punch podcast. I'm Kathryn Lancioni, and I'll be your host for this week's episode. Today, we're joined by Dr. Kareem Puranda, who is coming to us from South Carolina and North Carolina. Got my Carolinas all messed up, but he's going to come just from North Carolina, and he is going to share his backstory with us and talk about where he is today and all the good stuff he's doing for the world. So, Kareem, great to have you on the show.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for that awesome segue into my introduction.
Yes, please. So, before we get into the gut punch, if you could share a little bit about yourself, your backstory, that'd be great. Then we can get right into it.
Surely. So I'm originally from Bronx, New York. I gotta always put that out there for my New Yorkers.
Yes,
I'm
you
a New
do.
York diehard, right? So I come from the Bronx, and I earned a football scholarship to the South, Livingstone College, which I like to reference it as the Harvard of the South, in Salisbury, North Carolina, to play
Awesome.
football. And I ended up doing 4 years there. Then I became a police officer for 8 years, right out of college. And then I transitioned from law enforcement to the clinical mental health space, where I
Wow.
now own and operate my own practice, self-taught counseling and consulting. I have a speaking company under Dr. Kareem Puranda, and also a nonprofit called Achieving Success on Purpose, or ASOP for short, where we work with kids who are deemed at risk or underserved that come from communities that are in need of support because of violence and being impacted by trauma, working with
Okay.
kids ages 12 to 17, overcome challenges.
Wow, that's amazing. And I should tell you that we're going to be doing a conference probably in November focused on youth mental health. So that's definitely
Mm,
something that I'd love to have you involved with.
sure.
Yeah. So, all right. So you played, first of all, amazingly, you played football for 4 years in college. I think the stats like less than 3% of high school athletes get to play on the collegiate level. So that's amazing. And I have to ask you, what position did you play? I'm a
I
huge
was a
football.
running back. I was a
Okay.
running back.
Okay. And, I know I teach at Rutgers, and I have a bunch of the guys this semester actually from the football team in my class. Mental health is a real thing for college athletes. And so I'm sure that there must have been some challenges that you faced there. And then I would imagine when you were in the police force that there was a lot of crazy stuff that happened there. So if you could talk about like those moments or a moment that you want to share where your resilience is really tested, your gut punch, that would be, I think, a great place to start.
So I like to tell clients that I work with today that crazy people do not come to therapy. Rather, people who've been through some crazy stuff come to therapy to
Yeah.
figure out how to manage life on life terms. Now, I got to go back to my crazy stuff when I was a kid, right? Because ultimately, football saved my life because I was a child who grew up in a single parent household, grew up in a high poverty, high crime neighborhood. But here's the thing: the high poverty and the high crime and the things that came with that, the violence, the drug usage, the things that I witnessed either directly or vicariously, these things were normalized. So we didn't know it to be
Right.
called trauma. It was just a normal thing, everyday thing. Someone
Yeah.
got shot, someone got stabbed, or we heard gunshots regularly. So
Yep.
much so that we didn't even duck because we understood by the way it sounded, it wasn't coming near us. If you
Yeah.
will, we just had that kind of intuitive understanding growing up in an environment like that. So when I would take what I learned from the people who were available to me, right? My mom, a beautiful woman from Jamaica,
Yep.
worked 3 jobs, 2 to 3 jobs, most oftentimes just to make ends meet. And she was not always available to supervise me. So I used to leave the house and I would go outside and hang out with people who were available. And sometimes the learning and the values that those individuals would teach were not the best. And so
Right.
I would take those value systems because they kept me safe in that environment to
Yeah.
school. And I would go to school and I would get suspended over and over and over again for doing things that were inappropriate as it relates to fighting, being disrespectful towards the people in authority, such as teachers and whoever else. And it was just the nature of the environment that I grew up in. And I didn't know it was a problem until it became a problem for me in 10th grade when I got retained twice. I was kicked out of one school, expelled from one school because of some poor behavior, poor choices. And
Right.
then the school that I went to in the Bronx, the Child's High School, back in the 90s, was deemed the second worst high school in the Bronx.
Wow.
And I got left back there again because I used just to like to fight. And
Yeah.
the reason I used to enjoy fighting, or at least I'd say enjoy today, but looking back on it in retrospect, the reason it was enjoyable for me because it was a stress reliever. It helped me to cope with the pain and the hurt that I did not know how to label. And so anger was my primary default every time I felt triggered, every
Wow.
time I felt insignificant, or if my self-worth was, my dignity was challenged in any way, you're gonna get the worst side of me. And I never knew or recognized how my behavioral patterns were creating the conditions that would cause me to be triggered in the first place
Yeah.
because of how my trauma was woven. My trauma started with the realization that I was a kid who didn't have a father figure that I always wanted to be available to me. So that grief, the anger and the depression from that grief is what impacted a lot of my decision making that caused me to get retained twice in the 10th grade. Now, the second retention is where a police officer stepped in, or they stepped in multiple times, but it was at
Yeah.
this one time, Officer Merrill said to me, "Hey man, you got so much anger. You like to fight so much. Why don't you go box? Why don't you go wrestle? Why don't you go play football to get that energy out in a more productive way?" And I
Yeah.
said, you know what? That might not be a bad idea. I tried all three of them, and I fell in love with football. Football was
Right.
the main one that I said, oh man, I love this. And little did I know that it was going to earn me a scholarship. I gave my all to football. And the reason I gave my all to it was because it provided me with a sense of value and self-worth that I
Yeah.
wasn't able to achieve up until that particular point. And
Well,
I didn't get in
yeah,
trouble. I
I
didn't get
guess
in
it's to
trouble for it.
give you a sense of purpose
Yes.
and,
Yes.
and probably a community and a sense of belonging.
You got it. There it
There's a
is.
lot to be said for that. It's super important. Really.
Bingo. So football was never, I mean, I wasn't a natural athlete, but I worked at becoming a
Yeah.
good athlete because it was what rewarded me with everything you said, the community, the camaraderie, the fellowship, the positive male mentorship and role models versus doing stuff that was going to put me in the prison or the grave
Yeah.
prematurely. I now found something that could be constructive and took my team to its first winning season since the 70s
That's
in the
amazing.
90s and a 7-2 record, and we just missed the playoffs by one game. I broke a rushing record. It was an amazing time of my life that created a pivot for me.
Do you think, so this was you were in 10th grade, so you were like, what, 14, 15 years old?
15, 16, going on
Yeah, something
17.
like that, right? Do you do
Yeah.
you do is it only in retrospect that you, appreciate what football gave you, or did you realize that at the time?
No, it's in retrospect. All of this that I'm sharing with you today
Yeah.
is in retrospect because while I was in it, I had no clue what it was all about.
Yeah, I think so often that's the case. Like, you're in something, doing something, and you just go through the motions and do it or dig hard, dig deep to work that
Yeah.
like you did with football. And then afterwards, you realize how transformative it was,
Yeah.
and it sounds like that was the case for you. All
No
right.
question.
So you get recruited to play college football. What was that like?
It was amazing. It was confusing in the beginning because I didn't really understand the dynamics of college. I never really even thought about college, but it was an amazing opportunity where I sent off my tape, and the coach at the time was liked what he saw. They were looking to fill that running back slot,
Yeah.
and I and several others were recruited during that year to fill that spot of a guy who ended up going pro, by the way, the previous year. Phenomenal running back. And so it was a great opportunity to get me out of New York. I truly believe that this opportunity was nothing more than a divine intervention to allow me to leave New York.
Okay.
Because again, that environment wasn't the greatest for me. If I would have stayed around with the folks that I was growing up with, there's no telling what direction my path would have taken. I don't know if I would have had the intelligence independently to not pivot from some of the connections that were solid for me back then.
Yeah.
So I had to have a new environment where there were people that I found at Livingstone College that cared about me, that were genuine and were able to give me insight that was different from the insight I got from the folks that I grew up around.
Who, when you were playing football, what motivated you? Because it can be tough. I mean, I know from my college athletes and my classes, it's tough. What helped you get through those tough moments?
So I would say that a desire to escape, a desire to, they talk about fight, flight, and freeze when you're in survival mode. And I was in survival mode my entire life until I left law enforcement. the desire to escape the thoughts that were connected to my survival mode. So I would always go to the weight room. I would always go find a workout to do or something connected to football that would take my mind away from the stuff that I did not want to think about, that I had never addressed, such
Yeah.
as the abandonment, such as, feelings of growing up in poverty, some of the things that I resented that I had to live through as a kid growing up in poverty, and things that my mom really did her best to
Yeah.
navigate. And I'm not going to say that her best wasn't good enough. It was good enough, but at the time as a kid growing up, I wanted it to be better, and
Yeah.
she wasn't able to afford better. And so dealing with those things that no one ever walked me through until I went to therapy much, much, much later to
Yeah.
figure out how to resolve some of these things that followed me into adulthood. So it was really about the escape. I just found things. I used football. I used women. I used girls to, I had one for like every day of the week once upon a time. And it was all about taking my mind away from the stuff that I did not want to deal with. If I'm going
Yeah.
to be truly, truly honest about it.
So how did you get from football into the police force? How did that happen?
Yeah, so a gentleman, the chief, he was the first African-American chief of police, I believe, for that agency. He was also an adjunct professor at Livingstone
Okay.
for criminal justice. I was a criminal justice major, and I took 2 of his courses. And man, I just thought the world of this guy. I said,
Yeah.
man, he's a chief of police. He's in a position of power, and in the hood where I'm from, it's all about power, respect, and money. And I
Yeah.
didn't have money, but I knew how to get power and some respect because of my fighting skills. And so I looked at him as a representation of that, a black male role model who had power, legal power. And I'm like, man, I could do that job. And he inspired me to become a police officer.
Oh, that's
And he
wonderful.
was the main reason why I wanted to do law enforcement, because I didn't have a fond memory, any fond memories of law enforcement in my neighborhood. They were always usually the ones that came into the neighborhood and took people away that I cared about, by putting them in jail, and rightfully so, because some of the folks I grew up with didn't do right, so they had to suffer those consequences. Law enforcement was always deemed the adversary to our
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
With They just came in and arrested people, but they didn't give us any solutions on how to get ourselves out of this mess, poverty and crime that we were all experiencing back in the '80s. When crack was hitting pretty tough in New
Yeah.
York.
I think that's part of the challenge though. I mean, it's a whole separate conversation, but I think that's part of the challenge that enforcement faces. We are preconditioned to fear them, right? Just
Yeah,
by the nature of growing up. I mean, I don't care. I know that, it's like, oh my God, there's a policeman, in Jersey, like every other day, it seems like there's 5 of them on the highway and all they're trying to do is bust you for driving too fast.
yeah,
I remember the first time I actually actively went up to a policeman and asked a question. And they were so nice. I was like, I think that's part of the problem is like, we're I don't, no one means to, but
yeah.
we're raised knowing that in most cases, law enforcement only it comes to give you a ticket for speeding or whatever, but they can be, they can be super helpful. So what was it like for you going from being a kid in the Bronx, where you saw your friends getting picked up by cops constantly for doing stuff they shouldn't be doing, to actually being a cop? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, it was amazing. I would tell you it was amazing because it was a phenomenal accomplishment for me, because I
Yeah.
didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And I was always wired back then to chase an accolade or chase an award.
Okay.
And so achieving law enforcement or getting into the field was like an award. Like I had arrived. I was in a
Yeah.
career. I was in a job that, like, the job security was going to be like etched in stone. They're always going to need cops because someone's always going to break the law, was the ideology. And then, I also saw that it was, there's a lot of quantifiable stuff that I could do that would give me accolades.
Yeah.
That rush for accolades, how many great quality arrests I can make, how many drug busts, how many DUIs I can, all these different things.
Yeah.
And, so I became really focused on what accomplishments, what promotions I can achieve while in the profession. And
Yep.
so when I transitioned into it, what's interesting, my career only lasted for about 8 years. And what's interesting is that as I progressed in law enforcement, I realized that some of the mentality that I had growing up followed me into the profession as well. The whole subscription to disrespect, like not tolerating disrespect and those things, were triggers for me. And
Yeah.
so when I was in law enforcement and I got assigned to the communities as an African American officer, the theory was if you put someone like me in a community that's predominantly African American, which is also predominantly high crime, high poverty, it doesn't look like racial profiling when I go and make an arrest, or if I go hold the community accountable for any
Right.
kind of illegal behaviors that they may exhibit. And I get the theory of it, but it also puts me in a predicament because I get called the sellout, I get called the traitor, I get called all the things that are undesirable before they even meet me. And back
Yeah.
then, I didn't have the intelligence to understand that they were speaking about the uniform and what it represents and not necessarily me. I
Yes.
took it personal because of my baggage from my childhood, and then I ended up getting into a lot of use of forces, a lot of complaints whenever I would patrol those neighborhoods, trying to do my job.
No, I understand that. What was it like? I mean, what was it like when you first arrested someone? Like, what did that feel like?
The first thing that comes to my mind was an incident that happened during my field training, the third phase of my field training.
Okay.
And the way field training works, you get out of the academy and then you get paired with a field training officer, usually on each shift,
So
day
s-
shift, mid shift.
Someone else who has a beat, is that right? Like, so it's like you're paired up with someone who has a beat in a certain neighborhood where you're learning.
Yeah, and they've
Yeah.
got experience, they got some
Yeah.
time on, and they could show you the ropes, if you will.
Okay.
And one of the cliche statements they would always say, forget everything you learned in BLET or basic law enforcement training. I'm going to show you what real policing is like, right? That's what the
Right.
FTOs are responsible for, field training officers. So in my third phase, which is the phase right before you get released, if you pass it, to go now be independent and go do your thing. We checked out with a vehicle that was broken down on the side of on the entrance ramp to the highway. And so we're thinking that we're going to be good Samaritan cops and just help out this guy who just, broke down for some reason. And we get out with him and we check him out. And he's like, hey, man, yeah, the car just stopped. It won't start. All right. So we're getting ready to roll him a tow truck. Well, my FTO was on the phone talking to his girlfriend, I guess, or whatever, whoever he's on the phone. He was what we call caking. And he's on the phone talking to his girl. And then he comes to me and says, hey, man, hook him, which means arrest this guy, right? And I'm like, for what? Because you just out here waiting for this tow truck to
Yeah.
come to get his transportation, get him on his way. But come to find out, the tag on the vehicle was stolen or reported stolen. And so it came back to a channel that I wasn't on or I wasn't monitoring as a rookie. And my FTO said, hey, hook him. So he's on the phone talking to whoever he's talking to, and he's telling me to hook him.
Oh
And
my
I'm
God.
looking at him, the guy's looking at me, and then I go to grab him, the guy takes off running. And so I have to go foot chase. And fortunately, I was young. I had about 5 gears back then. I could get him. I caught him, and then he and I got into a fight, and I ended up knocking him out and then putting
Wow.
him in cuffs. That was my first arrest in my law enforcement experience during my third phase of FTO training. Now, I'll
Wow.
tell you this. Back in the early 2000s, the culture of law enforcement, at least I think it was a dying culture, because you now started to have what they call in-car dash cams, and then now
Yeah.
they have the body worn cameras. Use of forces were plentiful back then, but they were never recorded, right?
Yes.
Back then. And now we were getting into the era where, a lot of older guys wanted to see the new blood be like the older generation, tough
Yeah.
on crime, right? And so when I got into a fight with this guy and I thumped him and was able to put him in cuffs, my FTO celebrated like there was no other time in his life. He said, man, this rookie's got squabbles. And it made news around the agency how great I was at
Yeah.
handling myself during this this person who was resisting arrest. And I was celebrated for that. And so I had no reason to believe that what I did or how I approached law enforcement with a heavy hand was wrong until it became wrong. And so that's how my career started with the first arrest.
Yeah, it's so interesting. That really, really is. And then so what was the catalyst for you to decide to step away from law enforcement?
Yeah. So I like to preface it that I didn't manage my mental health properly. My
Okay.
career ended with me experiencing 4 lawsuits that were all back to back, all of this for using excessive force. And then 2 indictments eventually came as a result of 2 incidents where I stopped cars, guys ran, and we got into a fisticuff. And, they deemed it excessive force because these guys, one of them had to go to the hospital before we booked them. And then the other one was knocked out. And so I got in trouble for those things. And as a result, my career ended
Okay.
because I didn't manage my mental health properly.
Uh, Regrets there from your perspective?
What I do regret, right? Because I remember going through that whole process. I left law enforcement in 2010,
Okay.
and in 2012, around Christmas time, is when
Yeah.
the federal agents and the state bureau investigative agent came by and dropped off the indictment papers. And I thought, like, I left law enforcement 2 years prior. Like, why
Yeah.
why would they still come after me? But they felt like they had a case to put me in prison for 10 years. And
Oh my
so
God.
when I this is right before Christmas. My
Before.
my last 2 kids, I got 4 kids. The last 2 were born. I was a stay-at-home dad because I wasn't hireable. No one would hire me while this investigation was active.
Yeah.
The supermarket wouldn't hire me. The gas station wouldn't hire me
Oh
because
my God.
I was overqualified. I had a master's degree and they thought I was overqualified for their positions. So I was unemployable. And so I was a
Yeah.
stay-at-home dad for those 2 years. And 2013, I turned myself in January, second week of January or something like that. And I was arrested. For the first time in my life, I was told to put my hands behind my back and I was cuffed and escorted to the holding cell. And in that
Oh my.
moment, when you asked the question about regrets,
Yeah.
when I was transported by the federal marshals, I had to turn myself in at the federal courthouse in the state. They transported me to the holding cell. That's when the regret hit me. And the regret was for every single arrest I ever made. I understood why everybody ran from me. I understood why people didn't want to come to this holding
Wow.
cell or this experience. And it was like a privilege that I did not understand I had until I was put in a predicament to where I had my privilege of freedom removed in that moment. And so I regretted every single arrest I ever made because had I known my career that I would sacrifice my life for would
Yeah.
do this to me, I would have never approached law enforcement the way that I was conditioned to approach it.
Did you go to prison?
No, I went to that holding cell. I was there for my first appearance for about 7 hours in the holding cell.
Okay.
I was released on pretrial probation. I was, supervised, and then I went to trial in April of that year, 4-day trial, and I was found unanimously not guilty
Oh,
because I
thank
was
God.
finally able to tell my side of the story
Yeah.
regarding these arrests against these individuals that were not the most desirable individuals, but for some reason the state thought that they were legitimate charges, I guess.
Yeah. So looking back on that whole experience, I mean, that's crazy. How did it change you? Like even those 7 hours on the holding cell, I would think like something like that. Like you said, it definitely made you regret arresting people. But beyond that, like personally, how did that change you?
Kathryn, let me tell you something. It was in that jail cell that was like a blessing in disguise, right? As much as I hated it, as much
Yeah.
as I hated that whole process, what I discovered in that moment when I had all that 7 hours to reflect on how the heck did I end up here? Because I was a rookie police officer of the year. I was on the SWAT team, top gun on the SWAT team. I had all these accolades,
Yeah.
and my career ended here instead of a chief's chair. I wanted to be a chief one day, and it ended in a jail cell, right? And what I discovered was that I was operating according to an ego my entire life. Has
Wow.
been a front, a facade, fraud, all for the sake of making sure that I stayed safe and make sure that I avoided all the vulnerabilities connected to my pain points of inadequacies, feeling like I wasn't good enough and all these other things. My ego was the thing that I used to protect me from that stuff, but it also became the thing that caused me to lose more than I gained with it.
Wow.
So that's the beauty of what I learned
Yeah.
from that pain point.
So, all right. So it was ego that was driving you. I mean, I can't even imagine like the kind of the WTF moment that you must have had when you were in that holding cell. Like,
But
because as you point, you get all these, like, you were trying to serve the public by joining law enforcement.
yeah,
You did your best when you were in the job. You got rookie of the year. You had this accolade, that accolade. You arrested the quote unquote bad guys. And
yeah,
ultimately, it was the bad guys that made you look like a bad guy. Like, that's so messed up.
exactly.
It's just
Perfectly said. Exactly. I couldn't understand it myself.
it's like, what? It's like, yeah, WTF.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we laugh about it now, but like going through it, oh my Lord. So you get through that, you get to go to trial, you get to share your side of the story, clear your name, obviously. How did you feel after that?
Man, in court, I'll never forget it. I cried several times in court, matter of fact, and
Yeah.
I guess the people didn't really know it, but until the day that they read the verdict, because for that entire time I had to stay quiet. I just had to be quiet and just go through the motions of court and whatnot. And there were several officers that testified against me. Now, here's the thing about these officers. I would have given my life for each and every one of them had
Yeah.
it come down to it, right? And to hear officers testify against me who I would have given my life for, it really crushed me. It broke me.
I'm
I
sure.
remember I remember it might have been the second day of trial. During the recess, I went back to the chambers where me and my attorney were hanging out and talking about what was going on in the case. And I just started crying. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop crying because
Wow.
I felt I felt betrayed. I felt blindsided. I felt a lot of different emotions that I couldn't really understand at that particular time. But it was just hurt. I just put it under the umbrella of hurt. And then the second time I cried in that trial was the day that they read my verdict, which was unanimously not guilty on both counts. And when I say the feeling of weight lifted off of me, it just brought me to tears of joy, tears of thank you. I'm glad it's over, and I couldn't stop sobbing there. It took me a while to stop. And then what was so really powerful was when I left the courthouse. Kudos to all those guys up there that work at that building, the marshals. And when I got downstairs to the lobby and I was getting ready to exit the building with my wife and my attorney, there was like a it was like a line of officers, of marshals, that when I came out the elevator, they just started applauding me and they all gave
Wow.
me a hug. When I talk about a hero's welcome and the goosebumps, I mean, I'm even getting goosebumps now as I think about
I'm
it.
getting goosebumps hearing it. Yeah. Wow.
It felt so good because the whole time they were so stoic. They weren't talking to me. They were just all about business. And I saw the human side of them as they saw the human side of me, and it's just an amazing embrace. And until this day, I still keep in touch with some of those guys. Check in now and again with them now that I do this work, letting them know that I'm available. Hey, man, if you got any things that you got going on, man, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm here for you.
They must have such respect for you.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
because you went through something that, like, if I would imagine if you were a cop, like what you went through is any cop's nightmare, but you did it and you got through it.
1,000%.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So you got to stay home and spend time with the kids, which is, I think, is a privilege, really, truly a privilege.
It was.
Yes. Yeah. Like, so, taking a shower can be problematic when you have little kids, but, you get beyond that. So how did how did you fall into the mental health space now in your coaching, your leadership work that you're doing? How did that all result from what you'd been through?
Yes. So when I left that experience with law enforcement and I realized how my ego played a significant part my entire life, creating a
Yeah.
lot of problems and challenges, even when I got left back twice in the 10th grade, my ego is all ego stuff, right? And I was just amazed at how this thing that I engineered, I created it to keep me safe, was the same thing that was also messing me up. And my idea was that I'm going to eliminate the ego and be totally 100% transparent, be totally 100% true to myself.
Yep.
And I'm going to leave this world in a better condition than the one that I created or put it in when my ego was operable.
Yeah.
Right. And so I made sure I made amends with as many people as I could that I could think of. I apologized to people who I needed to apologize to because of my ego. My ego may have did something back then. I'm like, oh, yeah, I got to call that person. I got to let them know, hey, listen, that wasn't me. I'm changed. I'm different. I apologize for what happened back then. And so I did my rounds, right? And I felt really good about that.
Were people receptive to that when you made those phone calls and had those conversations?
Yes, they were, surprisingly so. There was some that I was kind of like, I don't know if I want to do that, but I
Yeah.
did it anyway because this type of courage to say that I need help or to say that, hey, something's wrong with me or I need to go back and correct something that I did wrong, it's a different type of courage. Like,
It
I
is.
didn't have any problems going after the bad guy. If they got guns and they're shooting, I'm going right to it. There's a fight over there, I'm going right to it. That courage is different. I would say the courage to say that, hey, I need help, or the courage to overcome some type of inadequacy or vulnerability is a more significant level of courage
Yes.
than that, going to where the gunshots are coming from.
Well,
And that's what I embrace now, that courage.
I love that. Well, because when you're going after the bad guys, right? It's like a superhero thing. Like you're going
Yeah.
after them. Like you learned how to fight. You have your gun, whatever. And I would think too that there's a bit of a not like a dopamine reaction, but something like that. Like you're going after, you try
Adrenaline. Yeah.
that guy, right? Like that's amazing because like we need that. But you hit on something that it's so true. I say this all the time. Being vulnerable is terrifying. Vulnerability is scary. And asking for help or admitting that your ego is leading you, you're like, it's like, okay, vulnerability with a capital V right here.
Yeah.
A lot of people aren't willing to do that. They're not, because it could be soul crushing because you don't know what the reaction of everyone around you is going to be. Like, are they going to have respect, which it sounds like you encountered, which is amazing? Are they going to call your bluff and say, we don't believe you. We think you're full of, poppycock, shall we say? And we just go away. Like, so it sounds, I give you credit because that's not the easy path to take, and I think because, being vulnerable is scary. We interviewed a guest a couple of weeks ago who has a movie that's made about her life. And I said to her, what was it like for you to watch the film? She said, terrifying, because it's all there. She said, I'm putting it all out there and people judge. And I'm like,
Right.
yeah, But she said, but it's also so healing, like so comforting.
Yes.
Because she said, if my story just helps one person, and her story is going to help more than one person, but she's like, if my story just helps one person, she goes, it was all worth it. And I think your thing is the same case, like saying, like, look, like my ego was leading me, my ego was motivating me, and yeah, I helped the world by arresting some bad guys, but my mental and my brain was not in the right place. That's a huge thing to do. So I commend you for doing that. I really do.
Appreciate it. Yeah, one of the things about vulnerabilities is that you don't want to be exposed. A lot of the things that are shame-based, according to whatever your ideologies are of who you are. For me, being a masculine man, saying that, hey, my feelings are hurt. What? Like, what are you talking about?
Former football player, former cop, saying that.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And the jock or jocks, right? Like, what are you talking about? Right.
Exactly.
And so, but the reality is that we all, no matter how muscular, how masculine we are, there is a emotional and a sensitive component to each and every one of us. It's called humanity, right?
Yep.
Being able to feel and be present with your emotions, which is something I never did according to my ego. Ego was just all surface, all masculine, and little did I know that, man, I'm just a baby behind all that anger. Anger is a secondary emotion to hurt. And, so the hurt was really what's present. The greater the anger, the greater the hurt. And so my hurt was so significant that it earned me the respect of being an angry guy to a fault, to the point where I lost more than I gained with that anger. When I should have been saying, hey, I'm hurt. Can someone tell me how to heal these wounds?
It's funny because you just touch on a personal experience that I had with someone, and their hurt became anger, and their anger drove them to say things, whatever, that they regretted that, thereafter. But hurt can translate into anger, which can turn into uncontrollable rage. And in that, people act in different ways. Some people say things, some people physically do things, whatever. And I remember as I was on the receiving end of this hurt/anger. And when these things were being yelled, I just sat and listened because I knew that the person that was saying what they were saying, that wasn't who they were truly. It was like they had been overtaken by this demon that we'll call hurt, right?
Yeah.
And I knew fundamentally that this person was a good person. And I knew fundamentally, because I'd known this person for a long time, that they did not mean it. But it doesn't make it that it was any easier to take. It just meant that I, as the receiver, had to take the high road and acknowledge, I'm sorry, apologize. I'm sorry you're hurt, blah, blah, blah. But, I don't deserve these words that are being yelled at me. But that's not easy to do either. So it's hard to be vulnerable, right? Hard to be vulnerable because you put yourself out there. And it's also hard to be a punching bag.
Yeah.
And I think, and it's hard to admit you screw up sometimes. And the fact that you went to people and said that your ego was driving you, I just commend you for that. I really, really do.
Yeah.
So talk about the work that you're doing now. And I'm curious, like, what you learned from all these experiences. How does that come into your work? How does that present itself in the stuff that you do?
Well, I will tell you that it makes me extremely relatable. And the beautiful thing about what I've gone through and what I've given myself permission to introspectively investigate within me, how I became who I was, and then now who I am today and becoming, it's this idea of I know how to read through behaviors and I know how to put words to emotions that people don't have. I remember when I was in my early 20s, I got this tattoo.
Yeah.
And I got this tattoo around my neck, lock and chain.
Yeah.
And I remember when I went
hold on, that's really saying something, a lock and chain.
Oh, believe me when I tell you. Now, I didn't know it back then, Kathryn, but like when I learned how to put words to what I was feeling, these tattoos represent all of it. It was the idea of the real me being trapped and held hostage.
Yeah.
And also the idea of stay away, stay out to whoever was outside of me. I didn't want you to get too close to me. And it was, I remember describing it as a indescribable feeling. And I didn't know how to put words to it. And that it was the tattoos, right? And so even though these tattoos are not valid as from a spiritual or like a meaning standpoint today, other than a point in time in my journey, they represent a story. They add to the story that I tell the people whenever I connect with them, especially first responders who usually when they come to see me, they question whether or not I know what it's like to be a cop. And hey, I was a cop and I couldn't handle it because now I'm doing therapy work. No, you don't understand my path, man. So I got to break it down to them. And then and then now there's a connection, especially with those hard officers, because a troubled officer is not going to say, hey, I need help, because the concern is If I say I got emotional challenges or I got psychological challenges, they're going to take my badge and my gun. And if this is my livelihood, that'll mess me up. I'm trying to make it to retirement as best as I can. And
Yeah.
so they're going to stay quiet about it. Silent suffering is what we call it. And I suffered in silence. So I know what it looks like and I know how it plays out. And I'm able to articulate in a way what people don't know how to put together in words for themselves.
Yep. Yep. So, and it's funny. I've been in situations before, like I went to journalism school, right? And it's a different parallel, but it's kind of the same. I went to journalism school and I was a PR person by trade, so I'm a PR person and who work with journalists. And so sometimes the journalists are giving you crap about something. And I'm like, wait, I was you. Like I worked as a journalist. I went to J school. Like I get it. So it's funny that it happens with cops also. Okay. So I would think that all of these experiences that you've had, like obviously, as you said, make you relatable. How does it help you be sympathetic and where possible empathetic with the kids or the adults that you work with?
Yeah. I'll tell you, there are two parts to it, especially as a therapist. You have to be careful with the sympathy and the empathy, right? Not
Yeah.
blending them too much. But as a human being, yes, there is some sympathy and there is also empathy. Growing up in an impoverished neighborhood, which is why I'm so passionate about helping kids with the ASOP program, where we work with those underserved youth. I know what it's like. I made a lot of poor decisions because no one understood. No one understood how to connect with me. And
Yeah.
so there was no teacher. Everyone thought I was a problem and I was a nuisance. When really, in my actions, I was just a kid asking for help without saying I needed help. So I
Yeah.
might have asked for help by hitting this kid or getting into this fight. And I just really wanted help to understand how to manage life without a male role model that I expected to be there, but probably who was not capable of being there. But it didn't erase my expectations of what I thought I should have had access to when I didn't have access to it. And a lot of the kids have a similar avatar where they're growing
Yes.
up in single parent households. They're growing up with someone who's not their biological parents, and they're angry. They're not angry. They're hurt.
They're
They're
hurt, but
hurt
they
by
don't.
the
But
fact.
they don't realize. I don't think. I mean, did you realize that like you were hurt?
No,
I didn't
not at
think so.
all. And that's the point. That's what makes us different, me different when I approach most of these cases. I understand what it is. And I know that they're making decisions from their pain points, which is why they disrespect their caretakers. They disrespect the teachers. They disrespect the cops. They disrespect the law because no one has cared for them the way that they want to be cared for. So now they don't care. They
Yeah.
disrespect because they were disrespected once upon a time when they were younger growing up. No one entertained them. No one listened to them. They were dismissed. They were neglected. Now they disrespect and they neglect other people. They neglect their freedom. They neglect their life. And so when someone can connect with them on that level, it is such a powerful
Yeah.
experience to see that child like, man, I like you. And they don't say that to anybody,
No, they
but
don't.
other than people who understand them and get them.
Yeah. They it really must take them back, give them pause when they meet someone that actually gets them, somebody that can
Yeah.
truly be, empathetic. Like, oh my God, like this guy actually understands me. Did you ever meet your dad?
Yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. Me and my dad are really cool today.
That's
I
cool.
recognize after having several conversations with him, my dad grew up really rough too, and my dad made a statement to me in my early 20s when I called him to ask him why he wasn't there for me. He
Yeah.
said that his dad wasn't there for him either, and he turned out okay. Now I felt like that was a dismissive statement back
Yeah.
then, but it was my dad's thinking. He was not equipped to be the kind of dad that I expected him to be. No
Yeah.
shade or no slight to him. He just wasn't groomed,
Yeah.
wasn't prepared to be that kind of father to my expectations. And so, my dad taught me a lot, even though he wasn't there. He taught me what not to do, and he taught me how I should be with my own kids. So I am an available parent to my 4 children, and whatever they need from me, I'm able to give them everything that I didn't know back then. I'm able to educate them on what I now know today so that they can make better decisions than I did. So
Yeah.
it worked out.
It's great that you have a relationship with him. It really is.
Yeah,
Cause you're lucky. That's not always the case, obviously.
correct.
No. And I think, I was going to ask you, like, how did that impact you as a parent? But we
Yeah,
talked about.
I learned what not to do. Started
Yeah.
there, and then my kids
And
taught me what to do.
well, and you also you learned what not to do, but you also, there were certain things that you didn't have because you didn't have a 2-parent household. So
Correct.
there were certain things that you probably needed, have realized you needed, and I would imagine that you infuse that into the way that you parent, if
Yes,
that's fair to
absolutely.
say. So looking back on all of this, where's your ego these days? You said your ego was like the big driver back in the day. Where's the ego now? Because we have to have some bit of an ego, right? No. The reason I say this is I am criticized for being, people are going to laugh when I say this, but people have told me I am too humble. Can't look at Kathryn. You have to accept the compliment. I hate accepting compliments. I'm really not very good at it. But what I've realized in doing the show and just in doing speaking gigs that I do and stuff like that, that like, um, you have to have a certain level of confidence to go up and speak in front of a group, or to have a podcast that has your name on it, or to have a coaching business like you do that has your name on it. So there is a little bit of I'm not going to call it ego. I'm going to call it knowing yourself, right? Because I think ego is a bad word, because people they're they have an ego, they're arrogant, but they know their stuff, they're confident, and to quote this. I always quote this guy. I took a spin instructor once. They say those motivational phrases. So Matt, spin instructor, said, there's a fine line between confident and cocky. And Matt is right. There is a fine line between confident and cocky. So my question is, you realize that back in the day when you were, the football player, then cop, that ego was a driver. Ego was like a huge part of you. And then you went through a period where your ego was crushed, I would imagine, when you, were in that holding cell. And you come out of it. Where are you now with yourself? Like, how do you feel? How do you keep yourself in check? How do you know when to lead with confidence, but how do you know how to regulate that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that, you ever heard the term hurt people hurt people?
Yes.
So that energy, right, that I once used with the ego because I was hurt to hurt people, it's the same energy. It's just now used to help people.
Yeah.
And so my default is not looking at ways, how do I hurt them before they hurt me? It's more so now, how can I help them? How can I be of service? How can I add value to them? It's the same energy. It's just now with a different focus. The ego is now more so pride. I have pride
Yes.
in what I do because I'm adding benefit. I'm adding value to people, to any space that I go in. My goal is to add value and not take away from, because I did so much of that with the ego. The critical thing about putting the ego in timeout is making sure that I have an alternative of a default to go to, or I go back to that. So I have to stick to the person that I want to become, which is what my mind is constantly focused on. Who can I become, and how can I make my best better than what it was yesterday by the interactions I have today? And so I'm always assessing that, right? Because I know how delicate he was back then, making sure that I stay strong in the push towards becoming something greater than I've ever been.
I love that. And I think that, trying to help everyone, like, discover them themselves and moving the needle forward as opposed to letting the needle slip back. I think that's so important. I was actually on a podcast earlier today, and the guy asked me, he's like, what are you working towards? I don't know. I said, I'm just working. I said, he started to laugh. I'm like, no, I'm serious. I said, because like my whole thing has always been, and my whole thing is that I think that you just got to put yourself out there, right? And see kind of what opportunities come to you. And I check out everything that comes to me, unless I've like gotten that same email before, and I won't like pick on a certain population that contacts me on LinkedIn, but there are certain people that you get emails from every day with opportunities. You're like, all right, I got that same email from somebody else last week. No, but like for the most part, like I try to check out stuff. As I say, I peek around the corner, right? Because I think when you peek, you learn. And from experiences I've had, I've learned, you could only move in one direction, and that's forward. You can't go back. And every day, I say there are 24 hours in a day. Hopefully I sleep 8 of them. That gives me 16 other hours to do stuff with. And some days, like, I'm my best version of myself. Other days I'm not. And that's okay, because we can't be the best versions of ourselves every day, because then we're really not the best versions of ourselves. We're just caught in like monotony and whatever.
Right.
So my whole thing is like, I just move forward and I try stuff, and some of it works out and some of it doesn't. And in my opinion, you learn more from the stuff that doesn't work than the stuff that does. Like you spent 7 hours in a holding cell, 7 hours. There are 24 hours in a day. You had 17 other hours, but it was those 7 hours that kind of changed your life.
Big time.
Right. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah, crazy people don't come to see me. People who've been through some crazy stuff, right? Come to see me, right? Yeah, what I went through was crazy, right? But here's the thing, and you hit on it. You hit it right on the head. That with time, which is the only currency that we don't get back, we're either using it wisely or we're wasting it. And I'm with you. I believe in trial and error. I've learned so much more from my failures than any mentor or anybody could have ever taught me. And so even though it didn't work out the way that I thought it was going to work out, the time it took to figure that out, and now, okay, I now know one way not to go. I can go this way. I now have, I can leverage that time, not wasted, but usefully, I can use it to now navigate the next 7 hours, if you will,
Yeah.
on how I want to spend my time.
Well, I said something this morning that I think is worth sharing because it makes sense here. True failure
Yeah.
is not acknowledging the time that stuff didn't work out, right? Success is acknowledging the ups and the downs and what you learn from it. Because that really is it. Because we live in this society now where like everything is filtered and everything is
Yeah.
angled, and and
Oh
it's like
man.
that is not life. Like that is not the way that it works.
Right.
And people get all talk about ego. People get all caught up in the number of followers, the likes, the
Mm,
shares, blah 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 blah. Of this, as you and I both know, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Like when you're those pearly gates, like God is not going to say how many Instagram
bingo.
followers did you have, how long was your streak on, like your streak. Like no one cares. It doesn't matter.
That's right.
But what does matter is what you said earlier, like, the idea of helping others move forward, and the idea, I think, of helping other people appreciate that there are 24 hours in a day and you ultimately control them. It's funny though, I have a girlfriend who, very, very dear friend of mine, known her forever. And we were having lunch last week and she goes, that 24-hour thing that you say, I'm like, what? I mean, that there are 24 hours in a day and you can control them. She's like, yes. She's like, ever since you said that on your podcast, like I've been thinking about that constantly. And I was like, oh my God, seriously. But it's true.
True. That's right. Right.
You know? So, Kareem, here's my question for you. So, if there's someone who's listening to the show that is just feeling like they are so stuck or at their bottom, like I would imagine your rock bottom was probably when you were in that holding cell. What's your advice for them to try to move forward, especially if they're feeling like they're low?
Yes. The first step is self-awareness. I truly believe that if you're not aware of how your life experiences have caused you to look at the world or make decisions in this world, you may be participating in a behavioral pattern that's setting you up to be stuck. Some people can become addicted to worry, anxiety, depression because of how their mindset is wired. And so you have to have a level of self-awareness about what you're thinking, what you're doing, that may be causing some of this cyclic behavioral patterns that you can't seem to break or shake from. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results.
Right.
There's a quote by Albert Einstein that I love. He says, "You cannot solve a problem with the same thinking that created it." And I'm like, "Ooh, that's juicy." If we change the mindset that now contributed to some of these outcomes, and believe it or not, there's something that we did do that is an ingredient into the outcome that we're now currently facing. If we pivot or change those ingredients, we'll get different outcomes. So I like to start off with self-awareness. The first thing is I have this framework with the 4 V's that I love to share with my folks.
Yeah.
So you went through a violation. Let's say you had a violation that occurred, right, throughout your life. Maybe there were multiple. From that violation or violations, you either become a victim, you either become a villain, or someone who's victorious.
I love that. That's so good.
Villain, victim, victorious. And I always like to ask, which one are you? Because everyone's writing their narrative, right? Everyone's creating their story. And when you sit down and think about it, depending upon what definitions you subscribe to, villain, victim, and victorious, you're going to come up with an answer. And that gives us a great bedrock or framework to build from, to create the victorious mindset that's going to hopefully benefit the person in whatever context their life is currently in. But it begins with self-awareness.
It does begin with self-awareness. And I think, what I, again, go back to what you said earlier, which is self-awareness. And that was how you realized that it was your ego that was driving you.
Yeah.
And there's this, you quote Albert Einstein, I'll quote Beyonce. And
Okay.
I tell you, I've quoted Beyonce, the specific quotes, and big some rooms to people that are like Einstein. They're like, oh my God, she quotes Beyonce. And Beyonce has been noted for saying that, like, when something goes wrong, she doesn't blame the world around her. She stops and thinks about what could she have done differently.
There it is.
It's the outcome, right? Queen bee only. There is so much. Yes, there's a lot that's not in our control, right? But there is so much that is actually in our control.
Yeah.
And I know my whole podcast is based on a near-death thing that I went through 2 years ago. I was came down with a horrible bacterial infection, and they thought I was going to die. I was put into a medically induced coma, and I woke up and didn't know where I was, didn't know what had happened. And it was a lot of didn't, right? But what I knew was that I was alive when I woke up. I didn't know where I was. I was like, what is going on? I didn't realize I had lost some of 3 weeks of my life. But I did because I was sleeping. What I realized kind of, after I kind of fully came to it was like, I was at my low. So that was like my version of your holding cell, I think. And I knew that I didn't know how this had happened, but it was reality. And the only person that could move the needle was me.
Bingo.
Right. And it was nothing that I had done. It just kind of random, unlucky, card in the deck of hands, but it happened. And okay, you look around the room and you're like, all right, I'm breathing. Like, I think I'm back, I don't know how I got here. I don't know how this happened, but I know that I have it in me to get better. And, it took months. But what motivated me, and this goes back to kind of the little bit part I was talking about teaching, was I had been a college professor since 2009, and I really at the core of kind of how I see myself or define myself, it's being an academic. When I woke up from the coma, the doctor comes in, tells me a little bit of not everything, but just kind of where I was, and I said, whispered because I didn't have a voice because I had been intubated, what do I need to do to be back in the classroom in September? And he looked at me and laughed, of course, and then said, well, you have to do what I do. You have to be kind to yourself. You have to listen to what I say, and you just have to be patient, right? And I did all those things, and I was back in the classroom in September. But the way that I got from, laying in that hospital bed, not knowing where I was, to back in the classroom was I gave myself permission and I motivated myself. And, it goes back to what you talked about, very different scenario, but you gave yourself permission when you were in that holding cell to realize like, okay, how you got there was really not your plan,
Right.
but you did, and you were going to get yourself out of there, and you did, and you got yourself through that situation, and then you went on, and that's so incredibly important because I feel like so many people are afraid to be self-aware.
Yes.
And that's why they don't move the needle. That's why they try to blame everybody in the world for their why they're stuck.
Bingo.
The reality is, as I have said, we are our greatest friend and our worst enemy. And if you give yourself permission to move on, you will.
Yes, spot on. And that's what I call a victim mindset, right? When we blame everybody else for why we can't do what we're capable of doing, we're not focused on that. So you're spot on, spot on.
Yeah. And it's I mean, that word permission, like,
Yes.
it is just, I think it's so, I don't think it's used enough, and I think it needs to be. So maybe that's on the podcast. I'll use it in every episode. So if people
That's
start
right.
using it, but I just think it's so important because, I don't know what people are afraid. That gives this whole the vulnerability thing we're talking about before. People are afraid to give themselves permission to be who they are, to move forward, to accept blame. There's so much. And I think if we could, and it's hard, right? Because we all get to this place of realizing what permission is and why it's important through different paths.
Yeah.
But I think once you get there, that's when this whole idea, as you have gone through and I've gone through, this whole idea of self-discovery and self-awareness comes into play.
Big time. I think, to add to your point about, the fear that people have regarding their lives, I think it does come down to like the idea of control, having power and control over one's future. So much so that many people are living their past in the present, which doesn't allow them to connect to their future because they know what they're going to get if they can control the variables and what they're familiar with. And so many people are getting outcomes that are not really good for them, but it's what they can control. It's what they're familiar with. And the unknown is what's frightening because people have failed to give themselves permission to construct something for the unknown, hence their future, which is why, the past and the future are the two biggest adversaries of each other, because either we're living our past in the present, we're not working on our future, or if we decide to do the future, we're now abandoning everything connected to this past to make sense out of how to do this thing in the future, which in my opinion, it connects you to a higher maturity level than the one you're coming from as it relates to your past. So it's if people understood how to release the kung fu grip on some of these experiences that we got back there, they'll be all right. You know what I mean?
That's right. Karl Lagerfeld, who, passed away years ago, he used to be the head designer for Chanel. Saw him interviewed once, and he said, "I don't care about the past, and I know nothing about the future. All I can control is now."
Right now.
And yeah, it's so true. So, and like I said, this conversation this morning that I had, asked me like what's I'm like, I don't know. It's just like it is literally to focus on the present. And as you were saying earlier, like I think what I love is like it's so important to just try to support and help, people in the world around you. All
Yes.
right, last question. So we talk a lot on the show about gut punches and crazy stuff people have been through and how they've come through it. For you, what's one thing every day that brings a smile to your face? What helps you get through those tough moments?
Yeah, tough moments, they never go away. They're always going to last. I like to say that, tough moments never go away, but we've learned how to manage them better. I remember when I had a hard time with mathematics, like I didn't understand math really well, word problems. But once I understood the keywords and all that jazz, it became easy.
Yeah,
But prior to that knowledge or know-how, I struggled. And one of the things I look forward to in life are the hard situations because I know I'm going to learn something from it that I didn't know prior to the hard situation come that presented itself. And so I look forward to things and challenges in life that will elevate me or teach me something that I didn't know that about myself without this experience taking place. I look forward to those things, and I look forward to teaching others about or from that space, especially my children. Seeing my kids grow up with an available parent and
yeah,
seeing what that looks like in a child, I never witnessed this before.
yeah,
And so
yeah,
it's like it's refreshing
yeah,
to see this thing unfold in the way that it's unfolding. Gratitude,
yeah.
having immense gratitude of life and knowing that I get to do this. Um, is really, really fulfilling now that I'm on the other side of the experience that, some might say should have taken me out, but it wasn't strong enough to do so. That's
That's
why I'm here. And
that's
so I'm
fabulous. Yeah, yeah. I love that. I love that. Oh my God, I love that. Um, so first of all, thank you for being on the show. So appreciate
you're
it.
welcome.
Love,
I
love,
appreciate it.
love, love the conversation. Like we have to figure out a way to meet in person. So because I just love your energy.
Yeah.
It's infectious. And I can only imagine the work you do with people. It just must be incredible. Speaking of which, if people want to get a hold of you, what is the best way to do so?
Yes. So they can go to my website at Dr. Kareem Puranda.com. I do trainings, I do keynotes, I do talks, I do a lot. My signature talk or training is Patrolling Your Purpose for law enforcement, but I also have one tailored for the community as well. So I'm on all social media. I have two businesses. I got the Dr. Kareem P on Instagram, and I also have Self Talk CC, which is my private practice where we work with people from the community on both sides of the law, manage their mental health.
It's great. Thank you. Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Another fantastic conversation. But again, thank you. It was so fun. Loved it.
Appreciate
Loved
you.
your story. Same here. Well, and thanks to all of you for listening to another episode of the Gut Punch podcast. We'll catch you here next week. Bye bye, everybody.
Peace.
That's it for today's episode of Gut Punch. I hope you found inspiration, because no matter how hard life hits, there's always a way forward. Make sure to follow or subscribe to Gut Punch on your favorite podcast platform. If you know someone who could use a little inspiration, share this episode with them. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay strong. See you in the next episode.